Rebecca Hartley was the kind of woman who blended into the background by choice. In the small town of Seward, Nebraska, she was known simply as Miss Hartley, the no-nonsense high school physics teacher with a sharp eye and a sharper mind. She drove a battered old Ford Ranger, wore denim jackets that had outlived fashion trends, and always kept her sleeves rolled just high enough to show a faded tattoo on her right wrist. An old naval insignia most people assumed was from a family member. Few ever asked. Fewer dared. She taught Newton's laws like gospel, ran a tight classroom, and left exactly at 4:05 p.m. every day, her papers in a neat stack under one arm. Nobody knew where she went. She never came to football games. She never joined teacher socials. If you asked 10 students to describe her, you'd get the same answer every time. Brilliant, strict, and kind of sad. What no one realized, not Principal Dawson, not the other teachers, not even her students, was that Rebecca wasn't born in Nebraska. She wasn't a quiet Midwesterner with a broken past. She was Lieutenant Rebecca Hartley, once call signed Jinx, a fighter pilot for the United States Navy with one of the most classified service records in recent memory. She had more confirmed air support missions than anyone else in her flight class. She'd flown into some of the most volatile airspaces on the planet, and she'd disappeared from it all nearly a decade ago, until one snowy Tuesday in January. That day started like any other. She'd just finished writing equations on the whiteboard when the front office buzzed into her. Classroom. Double quotes. Mrs. Hartley, you have 2 visitors. Government officials. She paused mid-sentence. The chalk slipped slightly in her fingers. Send them in, she said, too calmly. The students stirred as the door opened. 2 men in dark coats stepped inside. Their haircuts screamed military. Their silence screamed more. They scanned the room, then nodded politely at the kids. One of them spoke tall, mid-50s, and clearly not in town for small talk. Rebecca Hartley, he said, his voice low, direct. We need you to come with us. She didn't argue. She didn't ask who they were, or why they were there. She simply turned, wiped the chalk from her hands onto a rag, and gave her class one final glance. Review the velocity problems I gave you, she said. You'll have a quiz Friday. Then she picked up her coat, walked out of the classroom, and left behind the life she had built brick by brick for 8 quiet years. Outside, the black SUV waited idling, steaming in the cold. The doors locked with a metallic thunk as soon as she entered. The taller man reached into a briefcase and pulled out a sealed folder. Rebecca stared at the gold security band around it. Top secret, it read. He opened it. Inside was a photo. A face she hadn't seen in a long time. Rebecca didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her past had found her, and it wasn't knocking gently. Asterisk inside the black SUV. Rebecca didn't speak. Her eyes scanned the photo in the folder without blinking. The face was older now, weathered and framed by grainy satellite imagery. But she knew it instantly. Colonel Dmitry Sokolov, Russian Air Force defector, presumed dead 5 years ago. Now, apparently, very much alive. The agent beside her spoke quietly. He crossed into Poland 3 days ago and requested immediate asylum. He's carrying intel we can't afford to lose. But here's the twist. He won't speak to anyone. Not unless you're the one to extract him. Rebecca's voice was hoarse when she finally replied. That doesn't make sense. It does, said the agent, if you saved his life in Syria. She leaned back in the seat and closed her eyes. The ghosts came rushing back. 8 years earlier, Lieutenant Rebecca Hartley had been at the top of her class in naval aviation. Her call sign, Jinx, was earned not from bad luck, but from her uncanny ability to survive missions others barely returned from. Combat zones, blackout runs, deep strike targets, she volunteered for all of them. It wasn't adrenaline that drove her. It was precision. She could feel turbulence seconds before it hit. She could read radar pulses like sheet music. She wasn't just flying the plane, she was the plane. But then came Syria. It was supposed to be a simple surveillance run, in and out. She was paired with Lieutenant David Reed, her wingman and closest friend in the squadron. While circling over contested airspace, they caught a distress signal, not on the U.S. frequency. It was Russian. Sokolov's voice came through, panicked, desperate, under fire. A civilian convoy had been hit by extremists, and his own team had left him behind. Command ordered Rebecca and Reed to ignore it. She didn't. She disobeyed orders and dove into the canyon, flying barely 100 feet above ground. She guided Sokolov's smoke trail, suppressing fire with her own flares and guns, while Reed dropped to extract him. It was chaos. 2 enemy RPGs locked on. Rebecca flared both. Barely they got Sokolov out, but 2 villagers were caught in the crossfire. The damage captured on satellite footage was damning. Command was furious. They couldn't publicly reprimand her without exposing the mission's secrecy. Behind closed doors, she was offered 2 choices: court-martial or voluntary discharge under deep classification. She didn't argue. She signed the papers and walked away. As far as the world was concerned, Lieutenant Rebecca Hartley died that night in a helicopter crash staged in the mountains of Turkey. The Navy buried a closed casket, awarded her posthumous honors, and erased her operational files. Reed was sworn to silence. Even her parents never knew the truth. Back in the SUV, the agent continued. Sokolov says he has files confirming a rogue weapons cache in the South China Sea, something that could trigger a war. He refuses to trust anyone else. If we send anyone but you, he'll vanish. Rebecca laughed bitterly. So after all, this time you want the ghost back. We're not asking, said the second agent, speaking for the first time. We're activating a national security clause. You're still under oath, Lieutenant. You've been recalled. Rebecca stared out the window as the Nebraska planes blurred past. I'm not a pilot anymore, she muttered. I'm a schoolteacher. The agent replied coldly, not today. An hour later, they arrived at a private airstrip near Offutt Air Force Base. A jet waited with engines humming. Rebecca's stomach twisted. It had been 8 years since she'd flown. 8 years since the metal roared beneath her. 8 years since she allowed herself to even think about the cockpit. She was escorted onto the plane like a prisoner. But she wasn't in handcuffs. Just silence. In the seat across from her sat someone she hadn't seen since the night Syria burned. Commander T.J. Mercer, once her squadron rival, now graying, decorated, and unreadable. He didn't smile. Jinx, he said. Mercer, she replied, and the jet took off. The flight to Langley was quiet. Rebecca sat across from Commander Mercer, arms crossed, legs rigid. Neither had spoken more than 5 words since takeoff. Somewhere over Missouri, she finally broke the silence. You still think I shouldn't have gone back for him? Mercer didn't flinch. We lost 2 civilians, Rebecca. She stared at the seat in front of her. We would have lost a man. You gambled your career and mine on a Russian defector, Mercer said. We are ordered to stand down. I saved a life. You lost 2. The words sat heavy in the cabin. Old wounds, never stitched properly, had been ripped wide open. Rebecca didn't argue. She couldn't. The tribunal had said the same. Reckless, disobedient, a liability in the sky. The only reason she hadn't been court-martialed was because they couldn't publicly admit they were flying black ops in Syrian airspace. Instead, they erased her, quietly, efficiently, and for 8 years she stayed erased. After landing at Langley, Rebecca was taken through a side entrance. not through the front lobby. A signless door. A corridor that smelled of metal polish and secrecy. They led her into a briefing room, where half a dozen intelligence officials stood waiting. No introductions. No names. Only one photo on the projector. Colonel Dmitry Sokolov. His image flickered with coordinates and heat signatures. 3 days ago, a man began. Colonel Sokolov crossed into Poland with a black duffel bag and no shoes. He requested asylum in exchange for intel he claims will stop a nuclear standoff in the South China Sea. We verified his identity, but he won't speak to anyone. The screen shifted to show a handwritten note in rough English. Bring Jinx. Only Jinx, or I burn the proof. Rebecca leaned forward. What kind of proof? The man replied. Drone footage, classified weapons logs, command lists from rogue Chinese naval commanders. Things that could compromise both our countries and trigger retaliation. Mercer chimed in. Sokolov trusts you because you disobeyed orders to save his life. He believes you'll do it again. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. And what's the catch? Extraction won't be clean, another agent said. We'll insert you by carrier near international waters. You'll fly over contested airspace. Pick him up from a covert polished drop point and return before detection. And if we are detected, you're authorized to defend. But if you're captured, he paused, you don't exist? Again. Rebecca exhaled slowly. Of course. That night, she was given quarters on base. Clean sheets. No windows. Her old uniform waited, freshly pressed and still sharp. Her name tag read, Hartley R., but the insignia above it wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to someone braver, someone who hadn't spent years hiding behind chalk dust and lesson plans. She stared at the flight suit for a long time. Her mind drifted back to Syria, to the smoke, the screaming. Reed's voice shouting in her earpiece, the moment she realized she was flying on instinct, not orders. And the moment, hours later, when she saw the collateral damage footage. The 2 civilians lying among the rubble. That night, she didn't sleep. She COULDN single quotes T. By morning. She was back on the tarmac. Her jet waited an F-18 Super Hornet she hadn't seen since the day she was grounded. Someone had repainted the name below the cockpit. L.T. Hartley. Jinx. She touched the lettering. With her fingers, heart-pounding. Commander Mercer approached, helmet in hand. Still fits, he said. Rebecca turned to him. I'm not who I was. No one is, he said. But the job's still the same. Fly, survive, finish the mission. She hesitated. And if I freeze up? If I can't, you won't. How? Can you be sure? He paused. Because you're still the best damn pilot I've ever seen. Even when I hated you. Rebecca looked out across the runway. Where dawn was breaking over the hangars. She nodded once and climbed back into the cockpit. For the first time in 8 years. The F-18 Super Hornet hummed with power as Rebecca adjusted her harness and tightened her grip on the throttle. The canopy sealed shut with a hiss, and for the first time in 8 years, she was locked inside a war machine that knew her better than most people ever had. Her helmet slid on with a click. The HUD display flickered to life, bathing her in green. Light. Lines of telemetry, coordinates, and wind patterns scrolled before her eyes like an old language she hadn't spoken in years, but hadn't forgotten. Ghost One, do you copy? The radio crackled. She paused, letting the old call sign wash over her. Ghost One copies, she said. From the command tower, Mercer's voice came through. Carrier Roosevelt is standing by in the Baltic. You'll refuel mid-air over Germany. Touch down near the Polish border and wait for Sokolov's team to signal. We'll have satellite overwatch, but no air cover. If you're compromised, there's no cavalry. Understood, she replied. Her voice was calm, measured. Jinx. Mercer added, don't try to save the world. Just bring the man in. She didn't respond to that dot, because that's never how she flew. The afterburners ignited, and the jet screamed down the runway, a blur of motion and sound. Rebecca's body pushed back into the seat, G-forces hugging her frame like an old friend. Climbed through the clouds, the sun catching her wingtip as she pierced the sky. Below, the earth dropped away. Farms, roads, rivers, all shrinking into forgettable dots dot up here. She was weightless. Boundless dot alive dot over Germany. She connected with a KC-135 Stratotanker emitter for refueling. The long boom connected to her. Fuselage with a metallic thunk, and the Super Hornet drank deeply from the flying fuel depot. It was textbook, but the kind of maneuver that would terrify anyone who hadn't trained for war. She completed the link in less than 60 seconds. Still. Got it, the boom operator muttered over the radio. Rebecca gave no reply. She didn't need praise. She just needed to land dot as the jet crossed into Polish airspace under civilian disguise. Rebecca dropped altitude and killed all non-essential systems. She navigated by satellite signal and thermal markers only, descending into a rural strip. Carved from a forest, a makeshift landing zone used by covert operatives and smugglers. There, under a pale gray sky, she saw him. Dmitry Sokolov stood beside a rusted jeep, his once crisp uniform tattered and his face gaunt. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared as she climbed out of the cockpit. You came, he said in broken English. Rebecca nodded once. You're lucky I didn't let you rot, he smirked. No, lucky would have been not getting shot by my own men. She gestured too. The back of the jet. Your ride's here. Let's move. But as Sokolov climbed into the second seat, he hesitated. They will come, he warned. They've already intercepted a radio burst. You have maybe 20 minutes. Plenty, she said, already climbing back into the front. The engine spun up again. Turbines roaring dot. She didn't know if she was flying back into friendly airspace or straight into a dogfight. All she knew was that she had one chance. One. Man. One mission. No backup. 20 minutes later, just as she reached 20,000 feet and re-entered the edge of NATO's radar shield, two blips appeared on her screen fast, sharp, unmistakable. Russian Su-30S. Her heart slammed once. They'd been waiting. Unidentified aircraft. This is Russian Air Command. You are in restricted airspace. Power down and prepare to be escorted. Rebecca flipped 3 switches and locked the radar. She wasn't powering down. She was getting ready to fight. Rebecca didn't blink. Her eyes stayed locked on the HUD, where 2 enemy signatures crept closer like sharks in clear water. Su-30s, faster, newer, and now flanking her at high altitude. A moment felt unreal. For 8 years, she'd buried this part of herself. Now it was clawing its way out under pressure and adrenaline. Sokolov's voice cracked in her headset, laced with panic. They are broadcasting on military channel. They will not ask twice. Rebecca's fingers hovered over her missile lock controls. They already asked once, she muttered. That's one too many. The lead Su-30 banked left, a warning maneuver. The second moved into position behind her, a classic herding pattern. They were trying to box her in, force her down. I know this trick, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone. Her breathing slowed. Everything outside the cockpit fell away. The fear, the memories, the past. She became motion and focus. She became Jinx again. Unidentified pilot, power. Down your engines immediately, or we will engage. She didn't answer. Instead, she dropped flares and dove. The sky tore around her as she pulled a controlled nosedive toward the Baltic Sea, throttle pushed to full. Altitude dropped like a stone. The Hornet shuddered, screaming through the cold. There. Behind her, the Russians followed, one taking high, the other tailing directly. "Are you insane?" Sokolov shouted. "Welcome to Jinx Airlines," she snapped. "Please keep your arms and legs inside the aircraft." At Mach 1.3, she skimmed the wave tops, spray kicking up behind her as she juked right and then flipped into a barrel roll. The rear Su-30 tried to match the maneuver. Too slow. She fired a burst from the 20mm Vulcan cannon. Wing tore from the jet like paper. The explosion lit up the sea like a second sunrise. One down. She breathed, teeth clenched. The second. Jet climbed, trying to circle and hit from above. Rebecca's fingers danced across controls, launching countermeasures and making a tight vertical loop. G-forces crushed her chest. Her vision dimmed around the edges. But her instincts held, tighter than any textbook maneuver. "Jinx, this is NATO command." A voice crackled over an open frequency. "You're entering the defense corridor. Identify. This is Ghost One," she barked. "Requesting corridor clearance. Hostile eliminated. One bandit still airborne. I'm bringing a priority asset." There was a pause. Then, "Ghost One, you are green lit. Corridor open. Engage as necessary." It was all she needed. She let the enemy fighter come in close. Let him think he had a shot. Then, as he prepared to fire, she cut throttle, forcing the Su-30 to overshoot. It was a move only a few pilots had ever perfected. Rebecca was one of them. Now, behind the Russian jet, she had a clean lock. Tone. Beep. Missile away. The explosion turned. The sky orange and red. Silence followed. She exhaled for the first time in minutes. Sokolov stared ahead in stunned silence. "You were dead. Everyone said you were dead." "I was," Rebecca said quietly. "Until today." When she touched down on the Roosevelt's deck, crew members scrambled in a flurry of activity. Medics pulled Sokolov from the rear cockpit. Rebecca popped her canopy and climbed out, legs shaking only slightly. Commander Mercer was there, waiting. "You just took down 2 Russian fighters," he said. "With no wingman, no warning, no backup." Rebecca pulled off her helmet and let her sweat-soaked hair fall free. "Didn't forget how to fly. You were supposed to extract," he added. "Not light the sky on fire," she smirked. Plans changed. Below deck, Sokolov was already handing over his data drive to U.S. intelligence. But Mercer's eyes were on Rebecca. "You know this isn't over?" he said. She nodded slowly. "No, it's just getting started." And for the first time in nearly a decade, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt alive. Rebecca stood in the Roosevelt's debriefing room, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the encrypted screen in front of her. Across the table, 2 intelligence officers pored over the decrypted contents of Sokolov's drive, their faces tightening with every line of code and satellite image that loaded. "Is that?" one of them whispered. The other nodded grimly. "Live deployment coordinates. 36 silos. Not Chinese-controlled." Rebecca leaned forward. "What do you mean, not Chinese-controlled?" Mercer, pacing at the back of the room, spoke before the analyst could. "He means rogue. According to this, there's a splinter faction inside the PL Naval Command preparing a false flag launch. If they succeed, it'll make it look like the Chinese fired the first strike on a U.S. destroyer group off the South China Sea." Rebecca's blood went cold. "That's a declaration of war." "Exactly," Mercer said. "And we're 3 days from that scenario becoming real." The screen now displayed photos, warheads being loaded, a disguised carrier ship, coordinates eerily close to a contested international line. Rebecca turned to Sokolov, who sat in the corner under armed watch. "Why now? Why you?" His answer was slow, quiet, because the man leading this ... was my student once. Commander Zhao. We trained him, trusted him. But he believes war is inevitable. That by striking first, China will control the ashes of what's left. And he knows no one will believe me unless someone like you brings the truth. An emergency call was patched through to the Roosevelt Situation Room. Admiral Green, his face lined with exhaustion, appeared on screen. Commander Mercer. Ghost One, I've read the intel. You'll escort a covert recon team into disputed waters. Track the rogue fleet. We'll coordinate with allies for deniability. Rebecca leaned in. Are we neutralizing them? Not unless we have to. Green said, but if those missiles go hot, it's your call. Take them out. End it before it begins. She met his gaze. Copy that. Hours later, Rebecca stood beside her Hornet again, this time armed to the teeth. External tanks, twin sidewinders, JDAMs, and an onboard drone relay for the recon team in the accompanying stealth chopper. Sokolov approached her quietly, slipping a USB stick into her gloved hand. This contains Zhao's voice signature. He'll try to jam your comms, but his ego, he always talks too long. Rebecca pocketed it. Let's hope he talks himself into a coffin. Once airborne, the recon op unfolded like a shadow ballet. Rebecca flew point, her Super Hornet cloaked under radar-hugging altitude, guiding the stealth chopper like a phantom across the dark ocean. The wind screamed. Every movement had to be precise. Any mistake would trigger alerts on both sides. At 0420 hours, they reached the rogue carrier. Her drone relayed images of a disguised freighter, a floating monster, hiding missile silos and shipping containers. Ghost One, confirm. Came the whispered voice of the recon lead. Target has visual. Chinese insignia erased. Crew arming final stage. Rebecca's mind raced. Can we stop it? Negative. Unless we put a hole in the deck in the next 10 minutes, it'll go lev. A silent moment passed. The responsibility was hers. She toggled her mic. Command, this is Ghost One. Confirm strike authority on rogue vessel Tempest at Grid Tango 6. The Admiral's voice returned. Authority confirmed. Clean kill. No trace. She whispered to herself. Let's go back to war then. At 0427 hours, she dove. A missile streaked from her wing, trailing fire across the dark sky. The disguised carrier erupted in flames, a fiery burst lighting the sea. Containers flew like confetti, and a secondary explosion followed ammunition. Deck. The rogue first strike had been silenced before it ever spoke. But in the debris, something new appeared on radar. 2 incoming jets. Unknown origin. Rebecca stared at her radar, brow furrowing as the enemy signal approached. The transponder ID flashing on her heads-up display was impossible. Cal sign. Ghost Owen e-signature. Jinx Deltash blinked, her pulse quickening. They're using my voice print. She said aloud, her voice tight. The incoming message confirmed her fears. A cold, metallic voice, her own, captured and manipulated, came through. This is Commander Rebecca Jinx Callahan. I've initiated the first strike. Consider this an act of justice. The implications hit her like a punch to the gut. Sokolov's voice echoed in her headset from the stealth chopper nearby. They're framing you. If they play that message to NATO command or leak it online, your country will think you went rogue. This is bigger than war, Rebecca muttered. This is personal. 2 enemy jets closed in. They weren't Chinese. These were mercenaries painted to look like Russian aircraft, but flying with no allegiance. Ghost birds. Invisible to standard IFF systems. Whoever had planned this had done their homework. Deep fakes. Voice mimicking AI. A fake Jinx. To draw global retaliation. And all of it pointed to one thing. Zhao was still alive, and he wanted the world to believe Rebecca was the villain. She flipped her jet into a defensive roll. The horizon spun. Her fingers gripped the throttle. Ghost 1 to Roosevelt command. A false flag is in play. They've cloned my transponder. And voice ID. Do not trust any communication from secondary Jinx sources. Mercer's voice crackled in response. Already confirmed. Signals are coming from drone relays. We're tracking the source, but we need time. I'll buy it, Rebecca said. One of the enemy jets launched a missile straight at the recon chopper carrying Sokolov. No, Rebecca shouted, veering hard left. She fired a flare burst mid-roll, dropping below the missile's path. It caught the bait, exploded mid-air. The shockwave tossed her violently. Chopper secure, came the recon pilot's breathless voice. Rebecca climbed altitude and locked onto the nearest hostile. Her systems pinged, but her instincts took over. She didn't need gadgets to know what was about to happen. As she lined up a shot, the other jet angled behind her in a lethal pursuit. She's going high-low split, she whispered. Trying to corner me like they did in '08, she had. Taught this maneuver. Hell, she wrote the tactics manual. Whoever was flying these birds had learned from her. She would use that against them. Rebecca climbed steep, stalling just long enough to fake engine trouble, then let her jet fall backward. Like a stone, spinning nose down. The pursuing fighter overshot, as she knew it would. She fired. Direct hit. The enemy jet vanished in fire. The final ghost fighter tried to bank left and escape. But Rebecca followed like a phantom silent, surgical. She flipped her cones to open. Broadcast. I taught you everything you know. But I didn't teach you everything I know. And then she whispered, Goodbye, Zhao. Her missile streaked forward. Impact. Silence. The sea calmed. The radar cleared. Rebecca exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Sokolov's voice crackled through. Was it him? She nodded, knowing he couldn't see her. It was. He used my voice, my name, my tactics. He tried to turn me into a ghost again. But ghosts don't bleed, Sokolov replied. You're very much alive. Back aboard. The Roosevelt. The briefing room was silent as the recon team uploaded the voice-forged message to Command. Mercer tapped the screen. Zhao almost started World War III with your face and voice, and you stopped it alone. Rebecca looked out. The porthole toward the fading sky. I didn't do it alone, she said. I did it because I was forced to stop hiding. And now, maybe it's time I stop hiding for good. But as they reviewed the satellite data, one final signature blinked to life. A second drone array. Still active. Broadcasting the real ghost. One. Someone else had copied her, and they weren't finished. Asterisk the Roosevelt CIC was tense, lit by the cold glow of satellite feeds. One blip pulsed on the monitor. Low orbit, active, broadcasting encrypted data, tagged under her old calsign. Ghost 1. Rebecca stood behind Commander Mercer. Arms folded, jaw clenched. The drone relay shouldn't still be live, Mercer sighed. We confirmed the strike on the source. Rebecca shook her head. That wasn't the source. That was a relay. Zhao was a front. Then who's behind it? Rebecca glanced at the grainy feed again. She already knew. Hours later, Rebecca flew alone. No backup, no wingman. Just her and the cold wind of 30,000 feet as she streaked toward an abandoned U.S. listening post off the Aleutian chain, where the final signal originated. She landed on a rusted strip that looked like it hadn't seen a human footprint in 20 years. But the satellite dish above was humming, pristine, powered, and alive with activity. Her boots echoed as she entered the main comms hub. Monitors glowed, and in the center of it all sat a woman in uniform. Not Chinese. Not Russian. American. Rebecca. Froze. Colonel Monroe? Monroe turned slowly, a faint smile curling her lips. "Hello, Jinx." Colonel Jessica Monroe had once been her commanding officer, the one who approved her discharge 8 years ago after the incident over Iran. "You said I was too unstable to fly," Rebecca whispered. "You buried my career." "I buried the truth," Monroe said coldly. "Because the truth scared people. You were too capable. Too good. You weren't just a pilot, Rebecca. You were a weapon. And I don't let weapons go unchecked." Rebecca stepped closer. "You used Zhao. Set him up to fail." Monroe shrugged. Zhao was a distraction. A failed test run. The real experiment was the idea of you. What could happen if a myth flew again? We fed both sides. Your story, your ghost, your legend. And the world moved. Markets shifted. Treaties trembled. You risked nuclear war to prove a point? To consolidate control, Monroe said. Fear is control. And now? Now we leak the fake Jinx attack to the public. Nations panic. Defense budgets explode. And the people beg for protection. Rebecca's hand drifted to her sidearm. You framed me, she said. Used my voice, my name, to light a match and throw it into gasoline. I made you a god, Monroe hissed. And now I'm unmaking you. She reached for the console to broadcast the forged strike message. Rebecca didn't hesitate, not one shot. Monroe dropped, the console sparking as her body collapsed onto a panel. Alarm screamed. Rebecca lunged for the control board, pulling hard drives free, severing the transmission before it could leave the array. Sparks flew as she yanked cables with shaking hands. Sirens fell silent. The threat ended. An hour later, she watched the sun rise from the wing of her jet, seated cross-legged like a child on a rooftop. A helicopter approached in the distance. Mercer stepped out, coat flapping in the wind. You okay? He asked. She nodded slowly. Better than I've been in years. He sat beside her, quiet for a while. They're calling you a hero again. Rebecca gave a faint smile. They always do that, once the smoke clears. You know it's different this time. The real story's coming out. No more shadows. No more ghosts. She stared at the horizon, where the sky met the endless blue sea. Then maybe it's time for Jinx to retire, for real this time. He looked at her. You sure? She stood, brushing dust from her flight suit. Let them build statues. I'm going home. 6 months later, a quiet house, a small lake. A woman sits on a porch, sipping coffee as ducks glide by. No radios. No orders. No war. Just Rebecca. No call sign, no cockpit. But in the corner of the porch sits her helmet. Shined, untouched. Just in case. Because some ghosts never fade. They just watch the skies. The end.